We're back with Philosophy15. I'm Robert Talisse.
I'm Scott Aikin.
We are the authors, the co-authors of this book, Why We Argue and How We Should, A Guide to Political Disagreement. These are no more than 15 minutes of unscripted philosophical conversation. And today we wanted to pick up with something we were talking about in a previous episode, which is this. And then let me set it up, and then Scott, you can fill it in or knock it down. So it looks as if, as we were saying last time, an assertion can be evaluated by looking at the truth or falsity of that which is asserted, the proposition asserted, that gets asserted. But an assertion is also evaluable according to some other criteria, because when one asserts, one performs a certain kind of act by way of asserting a proposition.
That's right. You're commending something to somebody else.
Maybe, yeah. You're commending. You're. In fact, even the word assertion seems to have this. You're putting it forward. Right.
Yeah. There's another sense of assertion that, like, you assert authority, you assert yourself.
Right.
Yeah.
So it looks as if assertions, as such, are evaluable.
Yes.
In a way that doesn't. Maybe it's not fully independent, but in a way that's. Well, maybe it is. In a way that is along a metric different from the truth or falsity of the content of the assertion.
Right.
It looks as if there are ways to succeed and fail at assertion that are distinct from the ways of just saying true and false things.
Right. So So the point is that at the very least assertions are true and false, and those are evaluative terms, right? We think of them being accurate and inaccurate. So we could just start with the lucky guess, or the sort of someone confidently asserting, but it turns out that they didn't have any reason to think that it was true. They just guessed, or they just were confident, and they just ended up having it right. So the lucky guess phenomenon, and it looks like those are criticizable too. And so the setup is that it's not just that you need to have had some evidence for it, but maybe you might say the evidence is part of the reason as to why, like the fact that you saw it as salient, you saw the evidence as supporting, and you saw the assertion as salient, are part of even the reasons why you assert it, right? So you might even say we evaluate assertions and asserters not just in terms of how well they respect the truth and the evidence, but also whether or not it's the evidence that actually motivates them to do it too, right? So that we see it as sort of as a well-founded assertion, right?
Or at least not insincere.
Right. So it looks like you got to believe. Well, so maybe there's some complication, but it looks like you got to think that it's that it's doing well epistemically. That there are some sort of strange insincerity cases. Sometimes they're called selfless assertion cases, where one example is that you imagine a creationist science teacher teaching evolution. She perhaps doesn't believe that evolution is true, but she, as a science teacher and in her role as a science teacher, nevertheless asserts we came from the greater apes and things like that, and this science teacher then says that and asserts it, and it looks like that. Those look like those are perhaps above board style assertions, despite the fact that maybe they lack the full bore sincerity element.
Well, there might even be cases of more than just above board insincere assertions. There might be cases in which they're actually commendable.
Right. Good.
So
it's not just that.
When as philosophy teachers we teach, as philosophy teachers, when I teach Descartes or Plato and don't believe a word of it, right, but think that there's something important in the exercise of presenting to students as if the Platonic metaphysics were true, which I don't believe Platonic metaphysics is true, but asserting those things as if I were speaking in my own voice.
I think that we do. So maybe I think the teacher cases are curious. I've always been kind of
do we make assertions when we teach?
When you teach? So in some ways, like I've always done my best whenever I teach. I just say, look, whenever we're doing figure X, I'm just going to be figure X's defender. So like I'm like an actor on a stage, right?
Right.
Like I'll be philosopher X's best student or best defender or current defender now, and I'm going to go to the mat for all those sorts of things. And so in some ways they're sort of quasi-assertions, right?
Right.
Like in the same way like actors don't assert things, right? I mean, you can imagine in in Waiting, what is it? The Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead have the phenomenon of Rosencrantz or Guildenstern. I can't remember which of the two. They can't either. One of them says fire. I always wanted to say that in a crowded theater.
Right.
That is that a. So I wonder if the us as professors, whether or not those are actually full bore assertions or not.
Right. Do you think I mean, one way to get a handle or to start thinking through the puzzle is, do you think that a professor who doesn't preface his treatment of Descartes, who is the anti-Cartesian professor who doesn't preface his section on Descartes with the kind of caveat or the sort of off-stage, the sort of stage direction, right?
Yeah.
I am going to pretend to be a Cartesian or a is that person doing something criticizable,
right?
Or is that person just not making assertions, but just things that the audience are well primed to treat as assertions?
Right. So these certainly, we might call it sort of assertion light, maybe. Those are sort of curious cases where we might even say something like they're warranted to a certain degree, that you'd say. So like Sandy Goldberg has got a number of these sorts of versions where you'd say, look, it looks like as philosophers we've got a lot of disagreement. It looks like they're totally irresolvable. Someone just as smart as you on the other side has got a really good argument that you don't have an answer to. You got arguments that they don't have answers to. It looks like it's all a kind of a skeptical mess. How do you get to keep asserting philosophical stuff, right? How exactly is that? And it looks like, if you think that you might say pure disagreement, at the very least looks like it's a prima facie defeater. It looks like we know very little it looks like most of our philosophical commitments are not only not cases of knowledge, maybe not even cases of just like even prima facie justification. It looks like we're in a
none of it's assertable.
None of it would be assertable, but nevertheless, philosophy professors do a lot of talking in the indicative mode, right? Right? There are a lot of declarative sentences coming out of our mouths. So, I think that in those sorts of cases, I think that the assertion light phenomena idea is where you'd say, look, it's warranted given where the discussion is. It looks like it's the kind of thing that would be pushing inquiry forward in the same way in which we might say, like, look, whenever we're philosophizing, in some ways they function more like working hypotheses that we say in tones of certainty. Right. I think that's maybe a better way, because I mean I know for sure that like whenever I've talked about the philosophical views that I've got with people and I say, well, here's a crazy view that I've got, and people are like, what? Then why do you have it if you say it's the crazy view? It's like, well, it's counterintuitive and it's a thing that I'm pretty good at defending.
Right.
Is it a view that I have? Yeah.
So good, right. So there are questions about the sort of the borders between assertions and non-assertoric speech acts.
Right. And we think that it's penumbral, right?
Right. And it might, right. And so, but for the sort of garden variety assertions,
right.
Think about the ways that it can go wrong. So
easy cases where you have fallible reason to believe, but it ends up being false.
Right.
Right. So you've got pretty good reason, you've made a good induction, but it turns out that you were wrong.
Right. So like somebody, if I say, somebody asks me where Scott is, and I say, Scott's in his office. And they come back and they say, I just checked his office, Scott's not there. I said, I didn't say I knew that Scott was there.
Then why'd you say?
Right. So that looks like a misfire of some kind.
That's right. Yeah, I didn't. Right. There are plenty of these sorts of cases where you can imagine someone saying something like, well, I didn't say it was true, or I didn't, right? So I think that in these sorts of cases, you might say you've got blameless assertions, right? Where you'd say, look, I just saw him go in there. I don't know, like maybe he just stepped out just a second ago or something like that. I had good reason to believe that he was in there. So in those sorts of cases, we could say, well, look, we've got a blameless falsity, right? I mean, that's what fallibilism is kind of all about, which is that you've kind of done your epistemic best, but it's still possible that you could, that you could get it wrong. There are other cases where you had the fallible reasons and it ended up being true, but because of some other kind of strike of luck. So like Gettier cases are ones where it looks like we want to say, well, look, looks like it's faultless, and it doesn't look like it's hard. It's hard. I mean, in some ways, you have to analyze what goes wrong and what the fix for Gettier cases is to explain the trouble. You might say something like, look, there's just these sort of cases of non-creditable epistemic luck that makes it so that you had justification and it turned out true, but nevertheless, we don't want to sort of credit you with a sort of a gold star style assertion, right?
Let me try a different kind of case and get your intuition on it. So something like the following happened to me recently on a plane. I was asked, what do you think about? Enter some controversial issue, let's say. What do you think about immigration understood as blah, 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 blah? And my response was, I don't know. And the response to that was, well, just tell me what you think.
Right.
And my response to that was, I just did.
Are you supposed to have opinions about everything?
I don't know. That is my view.
That's democratic citizenship, man. You're supposed to have an opinion about everything. Don't you watch the news? That makes it so that you get to have opinions, doesn't it?
But that was a weird kind of sort of tell me what you think is a kind of dispensation,
right,
from the norms of assertion, right? Or it's a weakening of the norm. Like if you're not certain, you still get to say what you think in some mode other than the mode of assertion.
Right. It looks like whenever I think that this is right, where you say something like, it works kind of like it seems like or something like that, where you say, look, this isn't something that I want to go full on record with. It's not something that I think that I would act on. But this is kind of where my thinking is now. I think that there's certainly ways that you could say something like, well, I don't know, but I believe, right? Someone could say that, right? It's like I find myself having this belief. I'm inclined to say this, but I'm not going to sort of say it unadorned, right? It looks like embedding it in a I believe that, or here's what I'm inclined to say.
Right.
Sometimes I think that, again, kind of in the same way that like sometimes assertions and embedded assertions work more like working hypotheses.
Right.
Where you say, well, look, what do you think? I'm just looking to have a critical conversation with you, and so let's see what your inclinations are. Maybe you can give me some evidence that you're kind of working on, and maybe we can have a fulfilling conversation, and maybe a little bit of assent will yield intellectual assent.
Right.
Where we kind of trade some information. So that might be a sort of a way that might work.
Sort of like, what's your intellectually best guess?
Yeah, great.
Right.
Yeah, good. What's your informed guess?
Right.
Yeah, good.
Why don't we stop it there? Thanks, folks. Philosophy 15. See you next time.